Hello, I'm Bailey Leacher, and I'm back today on my channel as I will be talking about an upcoming live sporting event. It's been a long time since I've talked about that, but as I will be talking about the upcoming 2020 Major League Baseball season that will be starting this week, and I will be giving some of my thoughts and predictions of what might happen during this shortened 60-game schedule. So to recap what's gone on since Major League Baseball shut down during spring training. So obviously, in May, Major League Baseball, the Players Association, and the owners decided to start talking about when they were going to start the season back up, and just everything. Basically, for the next 2 months, they just could not agree on a specific plan for a shortened season. It was back and forth between like 82 games, 100 games, 114 games. They couldn't, agree on the prorated salary, 76 games. They wanted to have a hub, which got rejected. It was just back and forth. They could not agree on a plan. Finally, on June 23rd, I think basically the negotiation stopped, and basically both sides finally agreed on a safety and healthy protocol for the season, and they basically implemented the agreement back in March that if they couldn't make an agreement, a 60-game season would be implemented and they would be obligated to play that. And that's where we are now. And I gotta say, it was so tiresome anytime they talked about baseball, it was just these negotiations. It just looked bad. And it could be potentially a preview, considering that the current CBA for Major League Baseball expires at the end of next season. So we could potentially see this again, and this is not a good look for baseball at all. So obviously with this 60-game schedule coming up, there's a lot of rule changes that were made from the roster standpoint and from the game itself. Now, there were also some rule changes that happened prior to, during the offseason. So I'll talk about a couple of them. They're not, I'm not going to talk about all the rule changes. Some big ones, obviously, the universal DH, which they've been trying to push. I'm kind of hit or miss with this. I kind of like, there's always some great moments of seeing, pitchers in the National League hit home runs, like a Madison Bumgarner or a Bartolo Colon. But most of the time, there's just pitchers that are hitting that have no practice and are just striking out most of the time. It's very tiresome. So I get that. One of the other big rule changes, I think, is relief pitchers that come in have to face either a minimum of 3 batters or the inning, or they have to finish the inning. So you're not going to really see, let's say a lefty, a left-handed bat comes up. You're not going to see a lefty pitcher come in, face one hitter, and then be taken out. So now some other rule changes. Obviously, the big one, which I'm not a fan of at all, is the extra inning runner on base. So basically, last season there was a lot of extra inning games, and probably due to this pandemic, they want to limit that. So in the regular season, here's the rule. Started with the 10th inning, teams automatically start with a runner on second base. The runner is the player in the batting order position immediately before the leadoff batter for the inning. Should this runner score, it will be considered an unearned run. This rule will not apply to postseason games. This is a gimmick, and I'm not a fan of this at all. I think it's a stupid rule. Baseball's wants to they just think they want to speed up the game, but I just don't think it's possible to do that for a game. Baseball is about strategy and tactics and everything like that. It's not about speed. It never has been. And I don't know why baseball continues to try to, speed up the game unnecessarily. It's stupid, and it's not gonna work. With the pandemic and everything going on right now, there's obviously a lot of players that are questioning if they should even play this season. And risk their health and risk, possibly the health of their loved ones. And there have been players that have opted out, some notable ones. I have a list of who's opted out. I'm not going to talk about everybody, but there's some notable ones already. So the Braves, Felix Hernandez, the former longtime Seattle Mariners pitcher who was looking to make a roster spot with the Braves, opted out, as did outfielder Nick Markakis. Now, Nick Markakis is interesting because he opted out because after Freddie Freeman was tested positive for the coronavirus, and Freddie Freeman had some strong symptoms with the coronavirus. I think he's doing well, and I think he's looking to be back, so that's good news there. But it was a really eye-opener for Nick Markakis, another notable player. Cardinals relief pitcher Jordan Hicks, he's a diabetic, so obviously he's not going to take that risk. D-backs pitcher Mike Leake, that he was looking to be, it kind of hurts the Diamondbacks' depth system. The Dodgers pitcher David Price, who was acquired in the Mookie Betts trade in the offseason, which definitely hurts the rotation for the Dodgers. The Giants, Buster Posey. This is probably the biggest name, just because Buster Posey's a former MVP. He opted out because of he has twin girls that he and his wife just adopted that were born prematurely. So, he doesn't want to put them at risk, which is completely understandable. The Nationals, a couple notable players, Joe Ross and Ryan Zimmerman. Joe Ross, not really a big deal for the Nationals just because he was looking to make the roster, but Ryan Zimmerman's a big name because, he's been arguably the face of that franchise for the last 15 years, and this could potentially be his swan song right there as he's getting, toward the end of his career. Rockies outfielder Ian Desmond, I think, is another notable name. Now, he's opting out because of, I think I looked at it, he's opting out because of family, but also to address social issues going on. That's obviously been a big thing that's happened in this country in the last month or two, so understandable there. I don't fault any of these players that are opting out. I think, we just don't know, and they just don't think, the paycheck is worth the risk, and I completely understand that. Here are my award predictions for some of the top awards in Major League Baseball, starting off with the Cy Young Award. In the American League, I'm going to go with Garrett Cole, the guy who probably should have won it last year. I've watched some inter-squad Yankee games, and he's looked very good. I think he's looking like he's gonna make that contract that the Yankees gave him, and being the highest paid pitcher in Major League Baseball history. I think he'll make it worth it. I mean, he's a great pitcher, and he has been for the last 2 years, and I think he'll do that. Second, probably some runner-ups. Tyler Glasnow from the Tampa Bay Rays. I think he's gonna have a really good season. I think the Rays are very underrated. Their pitching staff, I mean, it's great. You could put anybody on that, but I decided just to keep one pitcher per one team. Blake Snell and Charlie Morton are great pitchers too, but I think Glasnow has a good shot at the Cy Young Award. And then third, Justin Verlander for the Houston Astros, who won the award last season. I think he's got a good shot at winning it again. And then for the National League, the Cy Young Award contenders, Jacob deGrom, who's won it the last 2 years. I think it might be a first, or at least a first in a really long time, if both New York teams, pitchers won Cy Youngs. And I think there's a good shot of that happening this season. Jacob deGrom, he's one of the best pitchers in baseball, and I think it's just a shame that the Mets overall are just not a better team, because he'd be a great pitcher to watch in the postseason. Second on, some dark horses, I got to go with Max Scherzer. He's one of the best pitchers in this generation, and he just looks, I think he'll have another great season. And then Walker Buehler, who I think is probably the next ace for the Dodgers. I think he's a really great pitcher. And he's, I think he can take that next step for them. For the MVP awards, I feel like with the American League, I think Mike Trout it's just too obvious to predict him. But you know what? There's nothing wrong with being too obvious. He's the best player in baseball. That is, if he plays, I think he is scheduled to play, but he's talked about his concerns about playing during this pandemic. But I think he's a go. Hopefully he is for the game itself. I think he'll have another great season. I think it's, he's the best player in baseball, and I think it's just a shame that he's not talked about when talking about the most popular athletes in Major League, in sports altogether. But I think that's not his, I think that's not his issue. I think that's Major League Baseball's issue, not being able to market players properly. But that's a whole nother discussion. Some runner-ups, Alex Bregman, the guy who came really close to winning it last season for the Astros. And then Mike Trout's new teammate, Anthony Rendon, he had a really good season, and he could have been the MVP in the National League, but I think he'll have another great season. He's one of the best third basemen in all of baseball. The National League MVP, I think the two big heavyweights that are going to be contending for it will be the last two winners of the MVP award, and Christian Yelich and Cody Bellinger. I mean, they're the best players, some of the best players in baseball. And Yelich, I think, had he not got hurt, he would have made a case for winning it again last year. But obviously, it went to Bellinger. I'm between those two. I think Christian Yelich is the favorite to win the MVP again. I think he's obviously, I mean, he's just been incredible. I think it's really close between those two. A dark horse that could potentially contend with them for the MVP is Ketel Marte. He had an outbreak, he had a breakout season last year. I've seen him, in inter-squad games, and last night in the exhibition game that the Diamondbacks played against the Dodgers, he's just been hitting home runs all, left and right. He's just got a lot of power to at the plate. He's a great fielder, and I think he's one of the more underrated players in the National League, and I think he could potentially make a run at the MVP award. So before I give my predictions on who will win the division and who will be the wild card teams, it's so hard to predict this just because we don't know if the season's if they're going to get through this season, and also a 60-game season is a small sample size. If we're basing this off last year, the Washington Nationals, the World Series champions from last year, would have not made the playoffs after 60 games. So it's really hard to predict who's going to win divisions, who are going to be wild card teams. There's obviously favorites, but also, I think there's literally most of Major League Baseball teams this year, I think, have a shot at, finishing out on top. I mean, even terrible teams, I think, have much more of a chance than they probably previously did in a 162 game schedule. So it's up for grabs this year. Now with my predictions, starting off in the American League, specifically the American League East, the favorites to win that division are the Yankees. Short answer there. I think getting Garrett Cole makes them the favorites, hands down. You put a really good Yankees team and you add Garrett Cole. I mean, it's just a no-brainer that they're not only the favorites in that division and in the American League, but they're one of the world favorites to win the World Series this year. This lineup still with Aaron Judge and Gary Sanchez and so many other guys that I'm not even mentioning. Their rotation that looks great, even looked great prior to getting Garrett Cole, but now it just gives them one of the best rotations in baseball. They're missing a couple bullpen pitchers right now, with Domingo Germán being suspended for violating MLB's domestic violence policy, and then Aroldis Chapman's out right now as he tested positive for the coronavirus and is recovering from that. So, but I don't think that's going to hinder the Yankees' chances, and I just think they're the favorites to win the division. I think the team that could give them, who I think will finish second, who could give them the most of a problem, would be the Tampa Bay Rays. They have, like I said with the Yankees, they have just as good of a rotation with, Blake Snell, Tyler Glasnow, and Charlie Morton. So they look really good. They kind of swapped a couple pieces in the offseason, but I like their lineup, and I think the Rays, they could be a really good team. I think last year was, making the playoffs and pushing the Astros to 5 games in that division round, I think is really telling that this is a team that could be a dark horse team to contend in the American League this year. Those are the only 2 playoff contenders. I think everybody else is kind of the Blue Jays, I think they'll be a fun team to watch. I think they'll finish third just because, they have a really good, some really great young players in Bo Bichette, Calvin Biggio, and Vladimir Guerrero Jr. I think adding Hyun-Jin Ryu helps their pitching staff, as he was one of the best pitchers in all of baseball last year. Probably could have won the Cy Young Award. But the Blue Jays, they're not quite there yet. But I think this is where I think progress will be made for them. Rather wherever they play. They can't play in Toronto this year due to not being able to go in and out of the U.S.-Canadian border. So it's to be determined as I'm recording this video where they're going to play, but we'll see what happens there. In fourth, the Red Sox, their pitching staff just does not look great. With the fact that David Price is gone, Chris Sale is going to have Tommy John surgery. Their top pitchers are like Nathan Eovaldi, and it just doesn't look good for them. Mookie Betts, is gone, and obviously Red Sox fans are really still mad about that. I think if the Red Sox are bad, they could, there is a trade deadline this year, which is kind of weird. But I think they can continue to cut payroll and rebuild. And so, you could see guys like Andrew Benintendi and Xander Bogaerts and JD Martinez and so many others, move on. And then in fifth, the Baltimore Orioles. There just isn't really a lot of talking pieces with that team, as they got a lot, they have a long time before they'll be competitive again. Moving on, in a pretty interesting American League Central this year. So the favorites in this division, the team I think will win it will be the Minnesota Twins. I think they have a really great lineup. I mean, they were a surprise team last year in winning the division. I mean, they have some great hitters, and adding Josh Donaldson, who had a great year last year. I think despite his age, despite the contract being a little bit steep, I think he's a solid hitter, and I think he'll have another great season. I think they have a lot of great young players. I think the concern for the Twins is if they can actually compete in the American League. I mean, they've lost. I think they currently own the longest playoff game losing streak in North American sports, as they've lost, I think, 16 games in a row. Obviously, a lot of them to the Yankees. So I think the concern is, can this team compete with one of those big, heavy hitters? So we'll see what happens there. In second, is going to be the White Sox. I think they'll be a wild card team, as the Rays were, or are the Rays going to be. The White Sox were one of the big offseason, they made a lot of additions in the offseason, getting guys like Dallas Keuchel, Yasmani Grandal, and so many others. I think this is, they have Tim Anderson, who's a great player. I think they have a lot of great a lot of great young pieces, and I think the White Sox are going to, take a step in the right direction. Third is the Indians. Shane Bieber, Mike Clevenger, and Carlos Carrasco are great pitchers, but I just think the rest of the Indians lineup is kind of meh. I don't know if it's enough to contend with the Twins and the White Sox. I mean, Lindor is here for the next 2 years, but it's looking likely that they're not going to be able to pay him a long-term deal, which is a shame, because this is one of the best infielders in all of baseball. So, I mean, other than, him, Carlos Santana, and Jose Ramirez, there's just a lot left to be desired in that lineup. In fourth is the Royals, as they're still rebuilding. I could definitely see them moving a guy like Whit Merrifield. Him and Soler are great players, but the Royals they need a lot more pieces before they can start competing again. And then in fifth, the Tigers. Long time, like many other teams, it's going to be a long time before they're competitive again, despite, having the number 1 overall pick this year and having some decent, prospects that could potentially be coming up. But they got a long way to go before they're going to be good again. And then the American League West. I know that joke was terrible, but the banging trash cans. The Houston Astros. Listen, I know this team is probably the most hated team in baseball right now, and in a way, this pandemic they were one of the teams that benefited from this pandemic. There's not going to be any fans in the crowd. Obviously, I think there's going to be strict rules on social distancing, so we're not going to be seeing brawls or probably as many people throwing at them as as what we would have seen during a regular season. But, listen, you can't deny the Astros and what the talent they have. They still have a great lineup with Altuve and Bregman and Brantley and Correa and Springer and, and Alvarez and even Yuli Gurriel. They still have Verlander. They have Zach Greinke. I know they lost Garrett Cole. Their pitching staff there might be some question marks there, but I think from a lineup and I think their rotation has enough pieces to make them not only they're still a contender. So, as much as people hate the Astros, you can't deny that they still have talent, and I still think they're going to win the division. In second are the Oakland A's. I was kind of back and forth that they were going to be a wild card team, but I don't know if they will this year. I mean, they have a really good lineup. Not many superstars, but I think they have a good lineup, and especially in a small market team, that they can be competitive, but I think they'll just miss out on a wild card this year. In third of the Angels, listen, I like Mike Trout in that lineup. Adding Anthony Rendon's great, but they still didn't make any moves to booster their pitching staff. I mean, when the Mookie Betts trade happened, originally the Angels were going to be a part of that deal. I think they were going to get Jock Peterson and Ross Stripling, I think would have been a great ad for them as former All-Star, and I think he would have it would have been a good ad for him on that rotation, but they don't have that, and if you don't have pitching, you're not going to go far, in my opinion, despite as much as you can hit. In fourth, the Texas Rangers. Corey Kluber was a good ad, but I don't think they're quite there yet. I look at their lineup. I mean, obviously Hunter Pence, who was one of their big hitters last year, left to return to the San Francisco Giants. So I don't know what's going to happen there. And then fifth, the Seattle Mariners. That long playoff drought will continue, and probably will continue for years to come. Moving on to the National League, starting off with the National League East, I'm going to go with the Braves, who won it last year. I think obviously losing Nick Markakis, who opted out. They were going to sign Yasiel Puig, but during the physical, he tested positive for the coronavirus and will not be joining them. So that was a pretty big blow to them. But I mean, their lineup's still good. I mean, we'll see how Freddie Freeman does coming back. Obviously, losing Josh Donaldson kind of hurts. But listen, they have Ronald Acuna Jr., who could potentially contend for the MVP. He was a player I didn't talk about, and I probably should have. Ozzie Albies, and they still have some great, a great lineup, despite losing those players that I talked about. But the pitching staff, we'll see what they can do. I think the Braves could contend in the National League this year, but I mean, last season I thought they were gonna get to at least to the NLCS before having that bad first inning, to say the least, in game 5 of the NLDS. But I still think they're the favorites. The Nationals, I think, will be second. They could contend for the division as well, but I think I'll demote them to just second and being the first wild card team. I think even despite losing Anthony Rendon, their lineup still has some good pieces. Juan Soto and Trey Turner. Obviously, Victor Robles and Michael Taylor. Also, Howie Kendrick's back. So there's they still have some great lineup pieces. Obviously, with not signing Anthony Rendon, they were able to sign Steven Strasburg. So that great rotation that I think is the best in baseball, is still there with him, Scherzer, Patrick Corbin, and Anibal Sanchez. They still have their two heavy horses in the bullpen with Sean Doolittle and Daniel Hudson. So, the Nationals, I think, are still a talented team. I still think they're talented enough to be a playoff contender. In third, just below them, is the Mets. I kind of went back and forth with them if they would be a wild card team, but I decided not to make them a playoff team just because, no Syndergaard's out. I like their lineup with Pete Alonso and Jeff McNeil and Michael Conforto and guys like that, but their bullpen, what are we going to... If I was about to call him Edwin Diaz, is able to bounce back, and Luis Familia, because those are the two main pitchers, the ones with the most experience. If they're terrible again this year, the Mets aren't going anywhere, and that's a given. So if they're good again, I think the Mets can be a playoff team. If not, I mean, other than Jacob deGrom in their starting rotation, I think that's it's a lot left to be. It's guys that are either, trying to bounce back. I mean, you have, I don't know, I'm trying to think. You have Rick Porcello, Michael Wacha, Marcus Stroman. I mean, those players are not what they once were, but if they can, look decent, the Mets got a chance. And fourth of the Phillies, I mean, I just think they got Zach Wheeler, Didi Gregorius. I mean, I like their lineup. I like their rotation even, but the bullpen is still an issue. I like Joe Girardi as a manager. I think he's a really good pickup for them. But if their bullpen is not good, they're like the Mets. If their bullpen sucks, they're not going anywhere. And then in fifth of the Marlins, they're still rebuilding. So, this is going to be another year, one of those years for them where they're just rebuilding. And now the National League Central, the toughest division to predict this year, because every team has reasons why I would pick them to win the division, but there's also fatal flaws with each team. I mean, there just isn't really a definitive favorite to win this division. So who am I going to pick? I'll go with the Cincinnati Reds, a team that has not made the playoffs since 2012. Why do I pick them? Because they just, by default, they just have the least amount of flaws. They were one of the more aggressive teams in the offseason, getting Mike Moustakas and Nick Castillos from division rivals. They had Shogo Akiyama, if I'm saying that correctly. They have a great pitching staff in Luis Castillo. If their bullpen does really well, if like Rafael Soriano bounces back, I think the Reds, they have the most talent. And this is a year where the Reds, I think, if any year where they can, get back in the playoffs, this is the year to do it. And I think they'll do it. In second are the Brewers. I mean, the Brewers still have Christian Yelich. They still have Braun. And even their bullpen still has Josh Hader. But a lot of pieces came in and out of the organization in the offseason. Mike Moustakas and many others, left the team in free agency. So the team's gonna look slightly different. But I think I think this is going to be kind of a weak division, so I think they'll contend for it, but I don't think it's going to be enough to get them to win the division or be a playoff team. The St. Louis Cardinals in third, I think they take a step back. I mean, the St. Louis is for a team that made the NLCS last year, they don't convince me as much. Obviously, with Jordan Hicks opting out of the season hurts them, but they're just kind of they're good, but they're not that good, but they're not that bad either. It's hard to predict them. And fourth, the Cubs. I just think listen, I like Ian Happ. I like Javier Baez, Wilson Contreras, Anthony Rizzo, and Chris Bryant. But their rotation just looks much older now. I don't know if Yu Darvish will be finally able to play up to that contract. I don't know if John Lester still has it, or Kyle Hendricks can bounce back, or any of these pitchers can do well again. I mean, it just seems like 2016 was a long time ago. And I don't know what the Cubs are going to do this year. And then in fifth, probably the team that has virtually no chance of winning this division is the Pittsburgh Pirates. Predictions for the NL West. The Dodgers are winning it. That's pretty much a given. Obviously, adding Mookie Betts, makes them, the heavy favorites, not only in the National League, but in baseball. They're probably the favorites to win the World Series this year. But, what people aren't talking about, the Dodgers, listen, they have a great farm system, so I don't think they'll have these issues. But they lost some key players from their pitching staff in the offseason. Rich Hill, a veteran who was a good veteran guy on that rotation, left to go sign with the Minnesota Twins. Hyun-Jin Ryu, their best pitcher last year, left in free agency to go to Toronto, so that's a big loss. And in that 3-team trade that they had to get Mookie Betts, they traded away Kenta Maeda, who was not only a good fifth starter for their rotation, but was really good in the bullpen during the postseason last year. So that's a big loss for them. But listen, they still have Walker Buehler. They still have some other guys coming up. Gavin Lux in that, they probably have the best lineup in baseball with, Cody Bellinger, Mookie Betts, Max Muncy, Corey Seager, Will Smith, and there's so many others that I'm not even talking about. They're the favorites to win the division again. In second, and a team I think will get the second wild card spot will be the Arizona Diamondbacks. It's really weird that how well they did last season, considering they pretty much blew up their roster. If you look at it from the outside, as Paul Goldschmidt, AJ Pollock, Zach Greinke, and Patrick Corbin were all either were traded away or left in free agency, and yet this team won 85 games last year, more than the 2018 team did. So adding Madison Bumgarner, even though he might not be what he once was, and adding Starling Marte, you can't deny that makes their team better. And I think it will be good enough to get a wild card spot. And third, a team that could potentially contend for a wild card spot. A lot of teams can in the National League, but I think they'll just miss it. Is the Padres? The Padres have a good farm system and also have a great young core of players. But I think for them to go anywhere this year, I think the pitching staff is going to have to the rotation's definitely going to have to improve beyond Chris Paddock, who's, their main guy, but they need more, if you ask me. I think they probably have the best bullpen in all of the National League, with guys like Craig Stammen and Kirby Yates. But I think what could help the Padres out is if the guys that have big contracts like Eric Hosmer and Manny Machado are able to perform, or make those contracts a little bit more worth it. They can have great seasons. I think the Padres could go places. In fourth of the Rockies, a team that didn't make many moves in the offseason. I don't think they made a single move actually. Their pitching staff, obviously in that ballpark, it's hard to have good pitching, but I don't like their, I don't like their rotation, and I think it's gonna impact them despite having great players like, Nolan Arenado, best third baseman in all of baseball, Charlie Blackmon, Trevor Story, and David Dahl and so forth. But I think that rotation is going to be, it's going to be problems, and I just don't think the Rockies are going to go anywhere. And then in fifth, the Giants. I think pretty much the remnants of their dynasty left last year. Bruce Bochy's gone. Madison Bumgarner's gone. Buster Posey's opting out this year. The only players that are kind of left around are Hunter Pence, who came back after being with the Texas Rangers last year. Brandon Crawford, who's not what he once was, and Pablo Sandoval. But it looks really different, and everybody's gone, and you just don't know where that team's going to go. And I think they'll be the worst team in the National League this year. So if we get through this season, predicting the playoffs are even going to be harder. But so to predict the ALCS and the NLCS, the ALCS I think will be between the Yankees and the Astros, like last year and in 2017. This time I think the Yankees will take it over the Astros. Garrett Cole I think is going to be the big factor in that. And then the NLCS I think will be the Braves and the Dodgers, and with the Dodgers winning that. And then for my World Series predictions, I'm going to go Yankees versus Dodgers. I usually don't go with pretty obvious predictions, but this year I will. And I think the Yankees will take it in 7 games. I think both teams are really close of how good they are. But I'll take the Yankees to win the World Series this year. What are your thoughts and predictions for the upcoming 2020 Major League Baseball season? Leave in the comments section below. As always, click like if you liked the video, and subscribe if you'd like the content on my channel. Thanks everybody for watching. Stay safe out there, and I will see you all later.